She didn't look lost. That was the first thing Staff Sergeant Angela Reyes noticed and immediately dismissed. The woman standing at the base of the C-17's ramp had a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, dust on her boots, and eyes that moved across the aircraft the way a mechanic checks a used car. Quick, practiced, done in under 3 seconds. Space safe passenger. The manifest clerk had written next to her name. Reyes read it twice. Civilians didn't usually get approved this fast, this quiet, on a flight this tight. But paperwork was paperwork, and Reyes had a plane to load. Strap in wherever. Mom, stay out of the way. The woman nodded once and said nothing. She found a jump seat near the back, sat down, and closed her eyes like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Nobody on that crew knew her name yet. In 19 minutes, they would be screaming it into a radio. The C-17 smelled the way it always did before takeoff. Hydraulic fluid, cold metal, the faint ozone tang of avionics warming up. Reyes moved down the cargo bay checking straps, counting heads, running the same pre-flight rhythm she'd run 100 times before. She didn't look twice at the woman in the back row. She had no reason to. That was, in its own way, exactly the point of who Mara Voss had spent years learning how to be. Before we get into this one, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. If stories like this get your chest tight, hit subscribe and smash that like button before you go. It really does help this channel keep telling them. Let's get into it. You don't survive the programs nobody talks about by being loud. You survive by being forgettable. For 3 years, the only thing anyone at Mara Voss's grocery store knew about her was that she paid in cash and never made small talk. Today, she was just trying to get home. Her connecting flight out of Ramstein had been canceled, some mechanical delay that stranded 40 people in a terminal that smelled like burnt coffee and jet exhaust. A master sergeant she'd once flown a training sortie with, a man who didn't recognize her out of a flight suit, mentioned offhand that a C-17 was heading stateside in an hour, space A seats open. She said thank you and walked away before he could ask her name twice. She hadn't touched a control yoke in 6 years. She told herself that didn't matter anymore. She told herself a lot of things, standing in that terminal, watching the departures board flicker through delays she had no control over. It was easier, most days, to believe the version of herself that scanned groceries and paid her electric bill on time. That version didn't have to explain anything to anyone. That version got to be forgettable, and forgettable, she learned the hard way, was its own kind of safe. She'd spent 6 years building a life where nobody asked follow-up questions, where a quiet nod answered anyone who wondered what she used to do before the grocery store. It had taken effort, that kind of ordinary, more effort some days than the thing she used to do for a living. But standing on that flight line, feeling the engines vibrate up through her boots, some part of her sat up and stretched, unbothered by 6 years of practice pretending it didn't exist. The engine spun up beneath her boots, and something old in her chest, something she'd buried under grocery runs and quiet Tuesdays, sat up and paid attention. She didn't know it yet, but the sky wasn't done with her. Somewhere above the Atlantic, a bird was about to change everything. The inside of a C-17 is not built for comfort. It is built for cargo, and people are cargo too, strapped into red webbing seats that face sideways, spines vibrating with a low growl of 4 turbofans. Mara had flown in worse. She'd flown in aircraft that didn't officially exist, over places that weren't on any map handed to Congress. This was practically a limousine. She kept her eyes down, hands folded, the picture of an unremarkable woman heading home. But her body did the things it always did, counting engine RPM by ear, feeling for the subtle shudder of turbulence before it hit, noting the exact moment the gear locked up after takeoff. Old habits don't retire. They just go quiet. Across the cargo bay, a young airman named Cole kept glancing at her. "You military?" he finally asked, raising his voice over the engine noise. "Used to fly a little," she said, which was true the way an ocean is a little wet. He laughed, not unkindly. "Cool. My uncle flew Black Hawks." He went back to his phone. She almost smiled. Almost. Her left hand, resting on her knee, had a thin white scar running along 2 knuckles, old, faded, shaped like nothing anyone would ever ask about. She didn't cover it. Nobody ever looked closely enough to ask. The airman across the aisle went back to a mobile game. The mother, too, rose up, hummed something to her toddler under the drone of the engines. Nobody watched the way Mara's eyes tracked the cargo netting overhead, checking tie-down points out of a habit that had nothing to do with being a passenger and everything to do with a lifetime of never fully trusting someone else's rigging. 90 minutes into the flight, the aircraft shuddered. Just once. Just enough. Reyes felt it before she heard it. A hard jolt through the airframe, the kind that made loose cargo straps rattle against their tie-downs. She was already moving toward the flight deck before the intercom crackled. "Loadmaster, cockpit. We've got a situation up here." Major Dale Petrov's voice was tight, clipped in a way that 18 years of flying hadn't fully trained out of him. Reyes climbed the short ladder and pushed into the cockpit to find gray smoke curling out from behind the instrument panel, thin ribbons of it crawling along the ceiling. "Bird strike, engine 2, Petrov said, hands already running the checklist. "Electrical fault behind it. Smoke's building faster than the vents can clear it." Co-pilot Captain Sam Liu was coughing into his sleeve, eyes watering, one hand still on the yoke out of pure muscle memory. "Fire bottle didn't fully catch it," he managed. "It's still feeding somewhere behind the panel." Reyes grabbed the portable extinguisher bracketed by the door, already calculating altitude, distance to the nearest divert field, how many souls were on board, and how fast this could go from bad to catastrophic. 41 passengers and crew. 1 working extinguisher. 2 pilots who were breathing in more smoke with every checklist item they read aloud. The smell of it reached the flight deck before the smoke did. Hot insulation, ozone, something acrid underneath that made Lou's eyes water even behind his mask. Petrov ran through the emergency checklist from memory, voice steady on the surface, pulse hammering underneath it. 11,000 feet, 1 working extinguisher, and an airframe that suddenly felt a great deal smaller than it had an hour ago. Nobody in that cockpit was thinking about the woman in the back row. They were about to. The smoke thickened faster than anyone expected. Within 90 seconds, Petrov's voice on the intercom had gone from tight to genuinely alarmed. Words clipped between coughs, sentences trailing off mid-checklist. Lou's hands had started to shake on the yoke, not from fear but from oxygen debt, the particular tremor that comes right before a person stops being useful. In the cargo bay, passengers pulled shirts up over their mouths. A child too rose from Mara, started crying, a thin, frightened sound swallowed by engine noise. Reyes reappeared from the flight deck ladder, face pale under the fluorescent cabin lights. "Listen up," she called out, voice steadier than she felt. "We got smoke in the cockpit from an electrical fault. Pilots are working the problem. I need everyone buckled, masks on if you've got access to the portable units under your seats." Mara was already reaching under her jump seat before Reyes finished the sentence. Not fumbling, reaching like she'd located that exact compartment 100 times on 100 different aircraft. Reyes noticed, filed it away. There wasn't time to think about it. Then the intercom crackled again, and this time Petrov's voice wasn't giving orders. It was asking for help. "Reyes, Lou's going gray. I need eyes up here. I need eyes up here now." Reyes didn't answer. She was already moving, portable extinguisher in one hand, the other braced against the bulkhead as the aircraft dipped through a pocket of turbulence that felt, for one sickening second, like the floor dropping out from under all of them. Behind her, the crying child had gone quiet, buried in his mother's shoulder. Mara's mask was already fitted snugly to her face, straps adjusted correctly on the first try, and she sat with her hands loosely folded again, watching the cockpit door the way a person watches weather rolling in, not afraid of it, just aware of exactly how much time was left before it arrived. Reyes went back up the ladder 2 rungs at a time. What she found in the cockpit stopped her cold for exactly 1 second. Lou slumped against his harness, oxygen mask askew, eyes fluttering but not focusing. Petrov had his own mask on with one hand, flying the aircraft one-handed with the other, smoke still bleeding from behind the panel in thinning but persistent streams. "He's out," Petrov rasped through his mask. "I need a second set of hands, or I need to declare and start a blind descent, and I don't love either option at 11,000 feet over open water. I can hold his mask, sir, but I'm not rated on anything past pre-flight walk-arounds, Reyes said, already strapping into the jump seat behind them. I don't know instruments. I don't know this airframe system's past what I load into it. Petrov didn't answer right away. He was fighting a headache that felt like a fist behind his eyes, the early signature of carbon monoxide creeping past his mask seal. Copy, he finally said. Get on the horn. Anyone back there ever touch a yoke? I don't care if it was a Cessna at 15. I need to know now. Reyes keyed the cabin intercom, voice cracking slightly. This is the loadmaster. Is there anyone aboard with any flight experience at all? Please identify yourself immediately. For 3 full seconds, nobody answered. Reyes scanned the rows of passengers, most of them staring back with the wide, useless eyes of people who wanted desperately to help and had absolutely nothing to offer. The smoke smell had drifted faintly into the cargo bay now, thin and sour, enough to make a few passengers cover their noses without fully understanding why. The child near the front had started crying again, and this time nobody hushed him because everyone else was busy being quietly terrified in their own private way. Then a hand went up in the back row. Not raised high, not urgent, just lifted calm, like she was answering a question in a classroom she'd already read ahead in. I can fly, Mara said. Cole, the young airman beside her, laughed before he caught himself. No offense, ma'am, but this isn't exactly a puddle jumper. Reyes came down the ladder fast, scanning the woman up and down, duffel bag, civilian clothes, calm hands. Everything about her read ordinary except the eyes, which weren't scared, weren't even particularly interested. They were doing math. Ma'am, I appreciate it, but we need someone with actual heavy aircraft time. Multi-engine, ideally. This isn't the moment for. Type ratings expired, but the hours aren't, Mara said, already unbuckling. I've got heavy time. I've got a lot more than heavy time. Right now your captain's flying single pilot with a hypoxic co-pilot and a fire that isn't fully out, and every second we spend vetting my resume is a second he doesn't have. Reyes hesitated. Protocol said no. Instinct said something else entirely. Something about the flat, unbothered way this woman had reached for her oxygen mask before anyone told her where it was. Get her up here, Petrov's voice rasped over the intercom, having heard every word. Now, Reyes hesitated only a half-second longer, torn between 6 years of trained protocol and the flat certainty in the stranger's voice. The kind of certainty that didn't ask to be believed, it simply assumed it already had been. She grabbed Mara's arm, not roughly, just urgently. This way. Fast. Behind them, Cole watched with his mouth still slightly open, the laugh from 30 seconds ago already curdling into something closer to shame. Reyes still didn't know her name. In the scramble to get Mara harnessed into the jump seat behind the center console, nobody had thought to ask, and Mara hadn't offered it. Petrov, jaw tight under his mask, threw a glance over his shoulder. You said heavy time. Define heavy. Bigger than this, Mara said, eyes already scanning the panel. Not searching, reading, the way someone reads a book they've memorized. Talk to me about your engine 2 shutdown and what the checklist says about restoring cabin air. Petrov blinked. That wasn't the answer of someone bluffing. Behind them, Reyes had pulled up the digital manifest on her cargo tablet, some half-formed instinct telling her to at least confirm this woman had a pulse on record somewhere official. She typed Mara's name into the DoD personnel lookup field built into the Flight Ops app, standard procedure for any Space A passenger, something she should have done properly at the gate instead of rubber stamping the paperwork. The screen spun its loading wheel for 4 full seconds. Too long. Then it returned something Reyes had never once seen in 6 years of loadmaster duty. Not a rank, not a unit, not a photo, just 3 lines of red text, and a field labeled security tier that made her stomach drop before she'd even finished reading it. Behind her, Petrov was still coaching Mara through the last of the fire suppression checklist, both of them too focused to notice Reyes go very still in the jump seat, tablet glowing in her lap, like something she suddenly wasn't sure she was allowed to be holding. She thought about closing the app. She thought about a lot of things in the 4 seconds it took the page to finish loading. None of them prepared her for what came next. Access restricted. Security tier, SAP, Special Access Program. Query logged. Contact OSI immediately. Reyes stared at the screen like it might correct itself. It didn't. She'd pulled up personnel records before. Pilots, loadmasters, the occasional general officer flying commercial style in the back of a cargo hop. She had never once seen a tier flag that refused to even display a name. "Ma'am," Reyes said slowly. "Who exactly are you?" Mara didn't look back. She was watching Petrov's hands on the yoke, cataloging the aircraft's rate of descent, the faint asymmetric thrust from engine 2 still spinning down. "Someone who used to do this for a living," she said. "Right now I need you to read me the fire suppression status on engine 2, because if it's not fully knocked down, we've got about 6 minutes before this becomes a different kind of problem." Reyes read it off, hands trembling slightly. Mara nodded, unbothered, and turned to Petrov. "Major, I need control. You're burning oxygen faster than that mask can replace it, and in about 90 seconds your judgment is going to start sliding, whether you feel it or not." "I got this." Petrov's eyes, bloodshot, watering, held hers for one long second. "Copy that," he said, and let go of the yoke. His hand hovered a half-second longer than it needed to, some deep instinctive reluctance every pilot feels when surrendering control mid-emergency. Then it was gone, and Mara's hands closed around it with the unhurried confidence of someone stepping into a coat she hadn't worn in years, but still remembered exactly how it fit. Reyes, still holding the tablet, said nothing about the red warning glowing in her lap. Not yet. There wasn't time, and some part of her had already decided it didn't matter as much as the 91 miles between them and the nearest runway. The moment her hands closed around the controls, something in Mara's spine straightened that hadn't straightened in 6 years. The yoke felt heavier than what she used to fly, sluggish in a way that spoke of cargo weight and drag she wasn't used to compensating for. But underneath the unfamiliar airframe, the fundamentals were the same fundamentals they'd always been. Airspeed, attitude, power. The rest was just vocabulary. "Talk to me about fuel state," she said, voice flat and even the exact opposite of the panic building in the cabin behind her. 40 minutes past what we'd want for a full transatlantic diversion, Petrov managed, mask fogging with each labored breath. "Nearest suitable field is Lodges, Azores. 91 miles. Copy Lodges." Mara's eyes moved across the instrument panel in a pattern that looked almost bored, if you didn't know what boredom like that actually meant. It meant total control. It meant a brain that had done this exact kind of math under conditions so much worse that this, by comparison, barely registered as an emergency. Reyes, still holding the tablet with its red-lettered warning glowing up at her, keyed the radio to raise Lodge's approach control, hands shaking slightly less now that anyone, had taken a yoke. "Lodge's approach. This is Reach 417 declaring an in-flight emergency. Smoke and partial engine failure. Requesting immediate vectors." The response came back fast, professional, urgent, and utterly unprepared for who was about to answer it. On the other end of that frequency, a controller in a quiet tower on a small volcanic island was about to spend the next several minutes talking to a voice that sounded, to his trained ear, unnervingly calm for someone reporting an active fire in a hypoxic co-pilot. He'd remember that calm for years afterward, long after he learned he'd never be told who it belonged to. "Reach 417, Lodge's approach. We have you on radar. Turn left heading 090. Descend and maintain 4,000. Emergency equipment is being staged now. Say souls on board and fuel remaining." Reyes relayed the numbers. Mara banked the aircraft into the turn with a smoothness that made Petrov, watching through smoke-stung eyes, quietly exhale for what felt like the first time in 10 minutes. "Where'd you learn to fly like that?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. "Same place everyone learns anything," Mara said. "Repetition. A lot of very bad days that taught me not to have this one." Behind the cockpit door, word had started to move through the cargo bay the way it always does. not through announcement, but through the particular quiet that spreads when people sense something has shifted. Cole leaned toward the passenger across the aisle. Did loadmaster say she's flying the plane? The lady with the duffel bag. I heard security tier, the passenger whispered back. Like actual government clearance stuff. What is she, CIA? Nobody knew. That was the thing that made it worse and better all at once. Not knowing, watching the aircraft's nose steady into a controlled descent by the hands of a woman none of them could have named an hour ago. In the cockpit, Engine 2's fire indicator finally, mercifully, went dark. Petrov watched the light change color and let his shoulders drop half an inch, the first real relief he'd allowed himself since the bird strike. It wasn't over. He knew that. But it was for the first time in 11 minutes, no longer actively getting worse. And after the morning he'd had, he was willing to count that as a small mercy and move on to the next problem. Fire's out, Reyes confirmed. Reading the panel Mara pointed to without looking away from the windscreen. Confirmed dark on Engine 2. Copy. Doesn't mean we trust it, Mara said. Fires like to come back when you stop watching them. Keep that extinguisher within reach the whole way down. Lou stirred beside Petrov, coughing weakly under his mask, eyes fluttering open enough to register the unfamiliar hands on the controls. Oh, he managed voice a rasp. Don't talk. Breathe, Mara said, not unkindly, without turning her head. You did your job. Let me do mine for a while. Petrov studied her profile in the gray cockpit light. The set of her jaw, the economy of her movements, the way her eyes never stopped scanning even while her voice stayed level. He'd flown with a lot of pilots in 18 years. He recognized something in her he'd only seen a handful of times before, usually in instructors who'd stopped being impressed by anything years ago because they'd already survived worse. You're not Space A, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Mara's hands didn't waver on the yoke. I am today, she said. Everything else is classified above both our pay grades, major, and I'd like to keep it that way until we're on the ground. Deal. Petrov almost smiled through the smoke. Deal. He went back to his checklist, but the question didn't fully leave him. It sat in the back of his mind the way an unresolved chord sits in a piece of music, quietly demanding to be answered even while the rest of the emergency demanded his full attention. Lou, drifting in and out beside him, would later say he remembered that exchange more clearly than almost anything else about the descent. The strange, steady calm of two people agreeing not to ask questions neither of them had time to answer. Reyes was still holding the tablet, the red security tier warning glowing steady against her palm. Some instinct told her to close the app, to pretend she'd never opened it, but another instinct, the one that had made her a good loadmaster for 6 years, told her this mattered, that whatever this woman was, the crew needed to know how far to trust her. She tried one more query, this one routed through the aircraft's satellite uplink instead of the local cache. The wheels spun and spun. Then, instead of the same 3 red lines, new text bled onto the screen. Slower this time, like it was being typed by someone very far away who wasn't supposed to be typing at all. Identity confirmed. Priority override authorized by OSI Director. Do not detain. Do not question further. Stand by for contact upon landing. Reyes read it 3 times before she trusted it enough to speak. Major, she said quietly, leaning toward the cockpit door. Whoever she is, somebody very senior just personally signed off on letting her keep flying this plane. Told us not to question it. Petrov absorbed that with the strange calm of a man too oxygen-starved to be properly stunned. Copy, he said. Wasn't planning to argue with the woman currently keeping us out of the ocean anyway. Outside the windscreen, the first gray smudge of the Azores coastline broke the horizon. Reyes stared at that coastline for a moment longer than she needed to, trying to reconcile the ordinary woman with the duffel bag against the words still glowing on her tablet. Priority override. OSI Director. Do not question further. Whoever Mara Voss was, somebody very high up had apparently been waiting for the possibility that she might need protecting from exactly this kind of situation, which raised a question Reyes wasn't sure she wanted answered. How often did that possibility come up? 9 miles out from Lodges, The aircraft hit turbulence that rattled the cargo bay hard enough to send a loose strap snapping against a pallet. Mara's hands corrected before the plane had even finished the first jolt, adjusting pitch and power and emotion so fast it looked less like reaction and more like anticipation. "You felt that coming," Petrov said, watching her instead of the windscreen for one brief second. "Pressure gradient off the coastline," she said. "Warm air over the runway, cooler over open water. You learn to read it before it reads you, or you spend your whole career getting surprised by weather that was never actually a surprise." In the back, the child who'd been crying earlier had gone quiet, lulled by the sudden steadiness in the aircraft's motion, the way even people who don't understand what's happening can feel when someone competent has taken charge. Cole sat with his phone forgotten in his lap, staring toward the cockpit door like it might open and answer every question building in the cabin. Reyes crouched near Lou, holding his oxygen mask in place, watching color slowly return to his face. "You're going to be okay," she told him. Then, quieter, almost to herself, "We're going to be okay." On the yoke, Mara's left hand shifted, and for just a moment, in the gray cockpit light, the old white scar across her knuckles caught the glow of the instrument panel. Nobody saw it. She preferred it that way. It was an old injury, older than most of the people currently strapped into that cargo bay had been alive to remember the world that made it. She didn't think about it often anymore. But moments like this, hand steady on a yoke, engine screaming just outside a thin metal skin, had a way of making old things feel present again, close enough to touch, close enough to remind her exactly why she used to be so good at this and exactly why she'd walked away from it in the first place. Lodge's approach, reach 417, 7 miles out, gear coming down, requesting confirmation on runway foam status. Mara said into her headset, voice level despite the aircraft shuddering again and the low-altitude wind shear rolling off the island's volcanic terrain. Reach 417, foam trucks are staged and standing by, runway 23 clear, wind 210 at 18 gusting 26. You're cleared to land. All emergency services in position. Petrov, breathing easier now that the smoke had thinned to faint wisps, watched the airspeed indicator warily. "Crosswind's ugly," he said. "Crosswind's manageable," Mara corrected, already crabbing the nose into the wind with a small, deliberate correction. "Ugly is when you fight it instead of using it. This airframe wants to weather vane on approach. You let it, you compensate late, you flare, you kick it straight right before touchdown. Textbook, if the textbook was written by someone who's done this and worse." Lou, still weak but conscious now, managed a faint, disbelieving laugh. "Who taught you to fly like this?" Mara's eyes stayed locked on the runway, threshold sliding into view through drifting cloud. "People who didn't expect me to talk about it afterward," she said. "Gears down and locked. Flaps full. Everyone brace. This is going to be a hard one." The runway rushed up to meet them. Petrov's hand hovered near the controls, not touching, just close, the reflex of a man who'd spent 18 years being the one in charge and hadn't quite finished learning how to sit still while someone else carried the weight of a landing this heavy. Behind them, Reyes had made her way back to the cargo bay to brace the passengers, repeating the same calm instructions over and over. Heads down, hands on knees, brace, 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 while privately hoping the woman up front was exactly as good as she seemed. 400 feet. Mara's hands moved in small, precise increments, correcting for a gust that tried to shove the nose 15 degrees off centerline in less than 2 seconds. She caught it before it became a problem anyone else would have noticed as anything but a slightly rough ride. 200 feet, airspeed's good, Petrov called out, voice steadier now. "You've got this." "I know," Mara said, not arrogant, just certain, the way a surgeon states a diagnosis they've already confirmed twice. 100 feet. The crosswind kicked hard, a gust that made the whole airframe shudder, and in the cargo bay someone gasped audibly over the engine roar. Mara didn't flinch. Her right foot pressed the rudder pedal in one clean motion, straightening the nose exactly as the main gear found the center line. The correction so precise it looked almost gentle from the outside. 50 feet. 30. The runway numbers blurred past the windscreen. Flare, she murmured to herself, more habit than instruction, and pulled the yoke back in the last controlled breath before touchdown. The main gear kissed the runway with a solid, controlled thump. Not the violent slam everyone braced for, but the kind of landing that only happens when someone has done this exact maneuver so many times their body stopped needing to think about it. Reverse thrust roared. Spoilers deployed. The aircraft began, finally, to slow. In the cargo bay, the silence broke into something else entirely. A ragged exhale that passed through 41 people almost in unison. Someone's nervous laugh. A passenger crossing themselves. The toddler near the front finally, blessedly, asleep against his mother's shoulder as if his small body had understood before anyone told him that the worst of it had passed. Cole let his head fall back against the webbing seat, staring at the ceiling, replaying the exact moment he'd laughed at her over and over until it stopped feeling funny at all. The C-17 rolled out along the runway, decelerating hard under reverse thrust, foam trucks flanking both sides with lights strobing red and white against the gray Atlantic morning. Nobody in the cargo bay cheered. Not yet. They sat in the particular silence that follows fear, the kind where your body hasn't caught up to the fact that the danger has actually passed. In the cockpit, Mara brought the aircraft to a full stop at the taxiway, hold line, and finally, for the first time in 11 minutes, let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding the whole way down. Petrov pulled his oxygen mask off, sucking in clean cabin air, staring at her like he was trying to solve an equation with too many missing variables. You just dead-sticked half a landing in a crosswind with a partially confirmed fire. On an airframe you said yourself you're not type-rated on. I said the rating expired, Mara said, powering down systems with the same unhurried precision she'd used the entire flight. Not that I forgot how. Lou, color fully back in his face now, was staring at her hands on the console, specifically at the old white scar across her knuckles, the kind of scar that comes from an ejection seat handle gripped too hard, too fast, one time a long time ago. Ma'am, he said quietly, what were you rated on? Mara finally looked at him. Something faster than this, she said. Let's get your crew checked out first. She unclipped her harness and stood, legs briefly unsteady after the adrenaline began its slow retreat, and reached to help Lou with the buckle on his own harness before the medics could get to him. It was a small, ordinary gesture, the kind any competent crew member might make, but Petrov noticed it anyway, filed it away alongside everything else about this woman that didn't add up cleanly into any single explanation he could offer himself. Emergency vehicles swarmed the aircraft the moment it stopped, medics boarding within 90 seconds to assess Lou and two passengers who'd taken in more smoke than was comfortable. Reyes stood near the cockpit door, tablet still clutched in one hand, watching Mara move through the aftermath with the same unbothered calm she'd carried since the first hand went up in the cargo bay. A staff car was already rolling toward the aircraft before the engines had fully spun down, black, unmarked, moving with the particular urgency of someone who'd been waiting for this exact call. A man in a plain gray suit stepped out before the vehicle had fully stopped, badge already visible, eyes scanning the tarmac until they found her. Voss, he said, close enough now that only the cockpit crew could hear it. It was the first time anyone had said her full name out loud all day. Petrov's head turned sharply. Voss, he repeated, quiet, testing the shape of it. The man in the suit didn't elaborate, didn't explain, just nodded once toward her like a colleague confirming a meeting time. Director wants a debrief. Whenever you're ready. No rush. You clearly had a morning. Mara allowed the smallest, tiredest ghost of a smile. Give me a minute with the crew first. The OSI man stepped back without another word, the kind of deference that told everyone watching exactly how far above their heads this had all been happening. Reyes watched the whole exchange from the cargo ramp, arms crossed, still processing the fact that a stranger she'd nearly turned away 20 minutes earlier apparently had a government official driving out onto an active runway just to greet her by name. She thought about the red warning on her tablet again, and this time, instead of dread, she felt something closer to awe. Petrov climbed down from the cockpit slower than usual, legs still unsteady from adrenaline and thinning oxygen debt, and found Mara standing near the nose gear, duffel bag back over her shoulder like nothing had happened at all. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I put a stranger with a duffel bag in my co-pilot's seat because I ran out of better options, and it turns out I ran out of better options because there weren't any better options. Not even close." "You made the right call under pressure," Mara said. "That's the job. You don't need to apologize for doing it well." "Reyes ran your name," Petrov said carefully. "Got a security tier flag that told her to stop asking questions. I'm not going to pretend I'm not curious." "Good," Mara said. "Stay curious. Just don't expect answers today." She glanced past him at Lou, upright now on a gurney, breathing clean air through a mask, giving her a small nod of gratitude he didn't have the strength yet to put into words. "How's your co-pilot?" "Vitals are stabilizing. Doc says he'll be fine in a few hours." Petrov studied her face, searching for something he couldn't quite name. "You could have told us who you were the second you sat down in that jump seat back home. Would have saved everyone a headache." "Would it have?" Mara asked. "Or would you have spent the first 5 minutes arguing with me instead of letting me fly?" Petrov didn't have an answer for that. He looked back at the aircraft, still ticking as it cooled, foam drying along the tarmac. 41 people had walked off that plane on their own feet. He'd flown enough years to know that wasn't the guaranteed outcome of a morning like this. That in another version of today, this conversation didn't happen at all. Reyes approached last, tablet finally powered down and tucked under one arm. The red warning screen burned in her memory in a way she suspected it would stay for years. "Ma'am," she said, "for what it's worth, I almost didn't let you up there. Protocol said no. I nearly followed it." "You didn't, though," Mara said. "That's the part that matters. Protocol's a guideline for the 99% of days that go normally. The other 1% needs someone willing to make the call anyway." "How'd you know I would?" Reyes asked. "I didn't," Mara admitted. "I just didn't have time to wait and find out the slow way." Reyes almost laughed, the tension of the last hour finally cracking loose from her shoulders. She hesitated, then straightened her posture without quite meaning to, the way people do around someone they've suddenly realized outranks them by a distance too large to measure. "Should I be saluting you or something? I genuinely don't know what you are. You already did your job better than most people would have under that kind of pressure," Mara said. "That's worth more than a salute." Behind them, Cole approached hesitantly, the young airman who'd laughed at her offer to fly less than an hour earlier. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, visibly working up to it. "I'm sorry I laughed," he finally said. "That was a stupid thing to laugh at." Mara's expression softened, just slightly. "You didn't know? Nobody ever does." Cole nodded, still visibly rattled, and shuffled back toward the terminal with the other passengers, glancing over his shoulder once like he wanted to say something else and couldn't quite find the words for it. Reyes watched him go, then turned back to Mara, struck by how little the woman standing in front of her seemed to want any of this. The attention, the questions, the quiet reverence that had settled over the whole flight line in the last 10 minutes. The staff car idled nearby, engine running, the man in the gray suit waiting with the patient stillness of someone used to waiting on people far more important than schedules. Mara lingered a moment longer near the aircraft, one hand resting briefly against the fuselage the way pilots sometimes do, without quite noticing they've done it. A small, wordless acknowledgement between two things that had just survived something together. Petrov extended his hand. "Major Dale Petrov. In case you ever want to know the name of the guy who handed you his controls without a second thought." "I noticed," Mara said, shaking it. "Most people hesitate longer than you did. Most people haven't watched someone read a fire checklist out loud without their voice shaking," Petrov said. "You made the decision easy." She held his gaze a moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. Not pride, just the quiet recognition of a debt repaid to a version of herself she didn't get to be anymore. "Take care of your co-pilot," she said. "And Major, for the record, this conversation didn't happen the way you think it did." Petrov almost smiled. "Copy that." "What conversation?" She turned toward the waiting car, duffel bag over one shoulder, the same unremarkable posture she'd carried up the ramp that morning. From a distance, Watching her walk away, nobody would have guessed she'd just landed a burning aircraft with a fraction of the systems working correctly. Reyes was beginning to understand exactly the point. She watched the staff car pull away from the tarmac, black and unremarkable against the gray morning light, carrying away a woman none of them would likely ever see again. Somewhere behind that departing car was an answer to every question the crew still had. A name, a program, a service record thick enough to explain a landing like that. And Reyes understood, standing there in the fading engine heat, that none of them were ever going to get it. She found, to her own quiet surprise, that she was okay with that. The debrief with OSI took 40 minutes. Most of it questions Mara answered with the practiced brevity of someone who'd given 100 debriefs before and expected to give 100 more. What she said stayed behind a door nobody on that flight crew would ever be clear to open. What mattered, as far as the crew was concerned, ended the moment the wheels stopped rolling on runway 23. Petrov filed his incident report that evening, describing the emergency, the smoke, the engine failure, the co-pilot's hypoxia, and in the section reserved for contributing personnel, a single line: civilian passenger assisted with aircraft control during crew incapacitation. Name withheld per directive. He read it twice before submitting it, aware that no report would ever capture what it actually felt like to hand his controls to a stranger and watch her land the plane like she'd done it 1,000 times, because she probably had. Reyes kept the tablet security flag as a screenshot on her personal phone for exactly one night before deleting it, understanding without being told that some things weren't meant to be kept as souvenirs. She didn't need the screenshot anyway. She'd remember it regardless, the exact read of those letters, the exact silence that followed. Lou, released from the base clinic with a clean bill of health, asked Petrov once, quietly, over coffee, whether they'd ever find out who she really was. No, Petrov said, and I think that's how she'd want it. Lou nodded slowly, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Some part of him had expected to feel frustrated by that answer, the way unresolved things usually left him. Instead, he felt something closer to gratitude, the specific, uncomplicated kind reserved for people who show up exactly when they're needed and ask for nothing in return, not even the satisfaction of being properly thanked for it. 3 weeks later, a small padded envelope arrived at the base with no return address, addressed to Major Dale Petrov by name. Inside was a single unit patch, worn, faded at the edges, stitched with a design that matched no squadron either he or Reyes could identify through any official channel they tried. No note, no explanation. Petrov pinned it inside his flight bag, where he kept the few things that mattered enough to carry, but not enough to explain. He never mentioned it in another report. He never tried to look up the patch's origin again after the search returned nothing but another restricted access warning. Familiar red text on a familiar screen. Reyes transferred to a new unit 6 months later, but she kept telling the story at every new assignment's first happy hour. Not the classified parts, because there weren't any she actually knew, but the human parts. The hand going up in the back row. The unbothered voice reading checklist items like she was ordering coffee. The scar on her knuckles nobody had ever gotten to ask about. She just seemed so calm, Reyes would say, every time, to new airmen who hadn't yet learned what real calm under pressure actually looked like. Like she'd already survived something so much worse than us, and this was just a Tuesday. Nobody ever fully believed the story. That was fine. Reyes wasn't telling it for belief. She was telling it because it was true, and true things deserve to be told even when nobody can prove them. Sometimes, at the end of the telling, a newer airman would ask the obvious question, did anyone ever find out her name, her rank, what she used to fly? And Reyes would just shrug and shake her head. Some people aren't meant to be found, she'd say. You just get to be glad they showed up when it mattered. Mara went home. That was, in the end, the whole plan. The one interrupted by canceled connection, a space-safe seat, and 40 minutes of the sky reminding her what she used to be. She unpacked the same duffel bag in the same quiet apartment, hung her jacket on the same hook by the door, and went back to work at the grocery store 2 days later like nothing at all had happened. Because as far as her manager and her co-workers and her neighbors were concerned, nothing had. She didn't talk about it. Not because she was hiding some tragic wound, Not because the memory haunted her, but because some chapters of a life are only meant to be read by the people who were actually there for them. The rest of the world didn't need the footnotes. Sometimes, restocking a shelf or ringing up a customer's groceries, she'd hear a plane pass low overhead on approach to the regional airport nearby, and some old, familiar part of her would look up without meaning to, tracking the sound the way old habits never quite let go. Then she'd finish scanning the next item, because that was the life she'd chosen, quiet and unremarkable and entirely her own. The scar on her knuckles faded a little more every year. Nobody ever asked about it. She preferred it that way. Some things are worth more kept than told, even the ones that saved 41 lives on an ordinary Tuesday over the Atlantic. And some mornings, walking to work before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops, she'd catch herself standing a little straighter than the day before, shoulders back, chin level, an old posture her body remembered even when the rest of her had spent years trying to forget it. Then she'd keep walking, duffel bag long since unpacked, boots traded for sneakers, one more unremarkable woman heading into one more unremarkable day, carrying quietly the one thing nobody around her would ever know to look for. If this story hit you somewhere real, do 3 things for me before you scroll away. Drop a comment and tell me, if you were on that flight in that cargo bay, watching a total stranger walk up to the cockpit door, would you have trusted her the way that crew did? Or would you have wanted more proof first? Hit that subscribe button if stories about quiet, overlooked people turning out to be exactly the person a crisis needed are the kind of thing you want more of, because this channel is full of them, and there are a lot more still to tell. And if you made it all the way to the end of this one, smash that like button. It genuinely helps more people find these stories, and it tells me which ones are actually landing. And while you're down there, tell me which part got you. Was it the hand going up in the back row? The 3 lines of red text on that tablet? The landing itself? 91 miles of ocean between a smoking engine and a runway that couldn't come fast enough? Every story on this channel has a moment like that. The one that sticks after the video ends, and I genuinely love reading which ones stick with you. If you're new here, this channel is built entirely around stories like Mara's, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the people everyone underestimates right up until the moment they can't anymore. Subscribing means you won't miss the next one, and there's always a next one. Thanks for flying with us today. Stay curious about the quiet people around you. You never really know what they used to be. We'll see you in the next one. One more thing before you go. If you know someone who'd love a story like this, a parent who served, a friend who's obsessed with aviation, anyone who appreciates a good, quiet hero moment, send them this video. Stories like Mara's are meant to be passed along, not scrolled past. Comment, subscribe, like, and I promise the next episode is already on the way.